antes.
He only gave shelter to a foxwoman, but she fell in love with him. To subscribe. Let's go. The night was cold and silent, except for the soft sound of wind moving through the trees. The man lived alone on the edge of a small, quiet town. His house was simple, not very large, but it was clean and safe. He had chosen a quiet life after many disappointments. People in the town often thought he was lonely, but he liked it that way. He enjoyed the calm, the slow passing of days without anyone bothering him. Most evenings, he would sit by the fireplace, reading or thinking about the past. Sometimes he would watch the stars, feeling a strange peace that only solitude could bring. On this particular night, the storm had been growing stronger since evening. Rain fell in heavy sheets, hitting the roof and the windows with a constant tapping sound. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and lightning lit the sky for just a moment before the darkness returned. The man was used to storms. They did not scare him. He had seen many storms in his life, both outside and inside his heart. But that night, something unusual happened. As he was checking his backyard to make sure the windows were closed, he saw movement near the edge of his property. At first, he thought it was just a stray animal, but as he stepped closer, he realized it was not an ordinary creature. Huddled in the corner, shivering from the cold and rain, was a small figure. She looked weak and frightened. Her long hair was wet and stuck to her face, and her eyes held a mix of fear and hope. Her ears were not like any human ears he had seen. They were pointed, delicate, and moved slightly with every sound. And her tail, soft and bushy, twitched nervously behind her. She was not a normal human, but there was something human about her. Something in her expression made him pause. She was a foxwoman, a being he had only heard about in old stories and tales. Yet here she was, real and vulnerable, standing in the pouring rain. The man did not think much before acting. He grabbed a heavy coat from the porch and stepped into the rain, holding it out to her. At first, she hesitated, unsure if she could trust him. Her eyes searched his face for any sign of danger or cruelty. She had faced many humans before, and most of them were unkind. But there was nothing threatening in his expression. He only nodded gently, offering her warmth and safety without asking anything in return. Slowly, she stepped forward, accepting the coat, and he guided her inside. Inside the house, the warmth from the fireplace greeted them. The scent of wood smoke and clean blankets filled the air. The man helped her dry off, handing her a towel and some spare clothes he kept for himself. She was small and fragile, shivering slightly, and he could see how exhausted she was. He did not ask questions about where she came from or why she was there. For him, survival came first. Food, warmth, safety, these were all she needed right now. He guided her to a chair by the fire, offering her a bowl of hot soup. She hesitated, but then took it carefully, her hands shaking. The first sip brought a small sigh of relief, and he noticed a tiny smile on her face. It was brief, but it was real. That night, the man could not sleep as easily as he usually did. He kept glancing at the foxwoman from across the room. She had curled up in a blanket, her ears twitching at every sound. She seemed alert, even in exhaustion, as if every small noise was a potential threat. Yet there was also a sense of relief in her posture. She felt safe here, at least for the moment. The man thought about her life, the struggles she might have faced. Her presence was unusual, and yet it felt natural somehow. He could not explain it, but there was a strange connection forming. Even though words were not yet spoken. Over the next few hours, the storm continued outside. Rain hammered the roof and wind whistled through the trees, but inside the house, there was silence, peace, and warmth. The foxwoman finally relaxed a little, closing her eyes and leaning back against the chair. The man, sitting nearby, kept a careful watch, not out of fear, but out of concern. He had not expected to meet someone like her. He had not expected to feel this sense of responsibility. But the moment she entered his home, everything changed. She was no longer just a stranger in the storm. She had become someone he wanted to protect, someone whose pain he wanted to ease. They did not speak much that night. Words felt unnecessary. The fire crackled, casting soft shadows across the room. Every now and then, he would glance at her, and she would meet his gaze briefly before looking away. There was an understanding between them, silent but deep. He gave her shelter, and she accepted it. That simple act, small as it seemed, was the beginning of something neither of them could yet define. It was the first step toward trust, toward friendship, toward something more profound. As the hours passed, the storm slowly began to ease. The rain softened to a gentle drizzle, and the wind quieted. Outside, the night was still dark, but the danger had passed. Inside, there was a quiet bond forming. The foxwoman, feeling the warmth of the fire and the kindness of the man, finally allowed herself to relax completely. She had expected cold and fear, but instead she found warmth and safety. The man, looking at her, felt a strange sense of fulfillment. Helping her had given him a purpose he did not know he was missing. That night, in the quiet house at the edge of the town, a connection began, delicate, fragile, and unspoken, but powerful in its simplicity. Morning would come, and with it, questions, choices, and challenges. But for now, there was only this moment. The man and the foxwoman, two beings from very different worlds, shared a small, quiet space of understanding. He had opened his door to someone in need, and she had stepped inside, trusting him in a way she had never trusted anyone before. It was more than shelter. It was the start of a story that neither of them could yet imagine, a story that would grow from this simple act of kindness into something neither of them would ever forget. And in that quiet night, with rain still dripping from the roof and the fire casting a warm glow, a new chapter in both their lives had quietly begun. The next morning, sunlight streamed softly through the windows, casting a warm glow over the small house. The storm had passed, leaving behind the smell of wet earth and fresh air. The man woke early, as he usually did, and quietly went about his morning routine. He filled a kettle with water, prepared breakfast, and tidied the small living space. As he moved around, he noticed the foxwoman sleeping in the chair by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket. Her breathing was even calm and peaceful. For a moment, he simply watched her, feeling a strange mixture of concern and curiosity. He wondered about her life before she came to him, how she had survived alone, how she had faced the world with caution and fear. When she finally stirred, blinking at the light, he greeted her quietly. "Good morning." Her ears twitched at the sound of his voice, and she looked up, still unsure whether to trust him fully. But the warmth in his eyes reassured her, and she managed a small nod. She had expected the world to be harsh, full of danger and cruelty. But here was a human who treated her like a person, not a problem. That simple difference was powerful. She had never known someone could offer shelter without expectation or judgment. Breakfast was quiet at first. He set a small plate of food in front of her, a simple meal of bread, eggs, and fruit. She hesitated, looking at the food as if it were a gift too good to be true. Slowly, she took a bite, savoring it, and he watched her carefully, making sure she had enough. He did not pressure her to talk or explain herself. He knew she needed time. He had learned through his own lonely life that trust and comfort could not be rushed. They had to grow naturally at their own pace, in small, quiet moments like this. As the morning passed, she began to move more freely around the house. She noticed the careful way he had organized everything, how even small items had their place. She helped him with minor chores, washing dishes and sweeping the floor. Not because she had to, but because it felt like a small way to repay his kindness. He never told her to do anything. He simply let her help if she wanted. There was no rush, no demand, just the gentle rhythm of a shared space. In these small acts, a pattern began to form. The house, once quiet and lonely, now felt alive. Even without words, they were learning about each other. The foxwoman had planned to leave once the storm passed, believing that she could not stay with a human, that her presence would always be temporary. She had never expected to feel this sense of safety or belonging. But as she spent more time with him, she realized that leaving was harder than she had imagined. There was a calmness in the way he moved, a quiet patience that she had never experienced before. He never stared, never asked questions he did not need answers to, and never showed surprise at her differences. She had spent so long hiding, watching, and fearing that someone would reject her. Here she could breathe freely for the first time, By late afternoon, the man decided to take her outside for a short walk. The rain had stopped completely, and the air smelled of grass and damp earth. She hesitated at the door, nervous about leaving the safety of the house. But he waited patiently, offering his hand, not forcing her to move faster than she was comfortable with. She took it slowly, feeling the warmth of his hand, and together they stepped into the sunlight. The world outside was not as frightening as she had expected. Birds sang from nearby trees, and small animals scurried across the ground, going about their lives. The foxwoman moved carefully, taking in the sights and sounds, realizing that danger was not always waiting behind every tree. As they walked, they did not talk much. Words were not necessary. Her presence beside him, the sound of their steps on the damp grass, and the warmth of his hand offered more comfort than any conversation could. The man noticed how she moved, graceful and cautious, and he admired her ability to stay aware and alert even in a peaceful moment. He thought about how fragile she seemed, yet how strong she must have been to survive alone for so long. It was easy to see that she had lived many difficult days, yet here she was, still standing, still moving forward. Over the next few days, a routine formed. She helped him around the house, and he continued to provide food, warmth, and space. Slowly, she began to relax, her movements less tense, her eyes brighter. She even smiled occasionally, though quietly, when she thought he was not watching. She found herself laughing softly at small, ordinary things, the way he misjudged the weight of a basket, the way he hummed while washing dishes, or how he tended to the fire with careful attention. These moments, small as they were, began to build trust and connection. She realized that she did not feel fear around him anymore. Instead, she felt a growing sense of safety and something she had never expected: comfort. The man, too, began to notice the changes. The house no longer felt empty, and he found himself looking forward to her presence. He noticed how she paid attention to details, how she learned quickly, and how she moved gracefully through his home. It was not only her appearance that fascinated him, but her spirit, the quiet determination and intelligence that shone through every action. He had never been a social man, but with her around, he felt a new type of companionship. It was gentle, patient, and unspoken, but it was real. One afternoon, as they sat together near the fireplace, she finally spoke more than a few words at a time. She told him about her journey in small, careful pieces, never revealing too much at once. She spoke of forests, streams, and nights under the stars, of times when she had been hungry or cold, and of moments when she had feared humans most. He listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. He only offered occasional nods and soft words of understanding. She felt heard, truly heard, in a way she had never felt before. That afternoon, for the first time in years, she allowed herself to remember the past without fear or shame. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, she realized that her stay was no longer temporary. She had begun to feel part of the house, part of the life he had built. She was still cautious, still aware that things could change, but the fear that had always been a part of her life had started to fade. And the man, watching the soft glow of the sunset on her face, felt a quiet joy he had not known in a long time. Their connection was growing, small and careful, but undeniable. By the end of the week, it was clear that neither of them could go back to the way things had been. The foxwoman had healed physically, but she had also begun to heal emotionally. She felt safe, cared for, and though she did not yet admit it, happy. The man had opened his home without expecting anything in return, and yet he found his life enriched in ways he had not imagined. The simple act of giving shelter had turned into a shared routine, a connection, and a growing bond. It was more than he had thought possible from a single act of kindness. In those quiet days, the house on the edge of the town transformed. It became a place of safety, warmth, and understanding. She learned that trust could be given slowly and returned gently. He learned that companionship could arrive unexpectedly and change the way he saw his own life. The storm that had brought her to his door was gone, but the connection it had sparked remained. Each day added another thread to the bond between them, invisible but strong. And while neither of them yet spoke of love or the future, both sensed that something significant was beginning, a story that had started with shelter, but was growing into much more. Days turned into weeks, and life in the small house settled into a quiet rhythm. The fox woman had grown more comfortable with her surroundings and with the man who had taken her in. She no longer flinched at every sudden noise, and she moved freely around the house, performing small chores without hesitation. Her presence had begun to feel natural, like a part of the home itself. The man, too, found himself noticing things he had never paid attention to before, the way she tilted her head when curious, how her eyes would light up at small joys, or the careful way she moved around the house. He could not deny that her presence had brought warmth and color into his otherwise solitary life. Despite the comfort of their routine, there was a quiet tension in the air, a feeling that both of them were aware of but did not speak about. The foxwoman began to feel emotion she had never expected. She had felt gratitude before, but now there was something deeper growing inside her. She admired the man not only for his kindness but for his patience, his quiet strength, and the way he never demanded anything from her. She noticed small things about him that she had never considered before: the gentle way he handled objects, the soft tone in his voice, and the way he always seemed to watch over her without interfering. These observations slowly turned into feelings that she had never allowed herself to have for a human. At first, she tried to ignore these emotions, believing that she could not allow herself to fall for someone like him. She had spent so long surviving alone, hiding from the world, that the idea of love felt dangerous and impossible. She feared what might happen if she let herself care too much. What if she got too close, and then he rejected her? What if he could not understand her fully, and she had to leave? These questions haunted her, and she tried to bury her feelings beneath the comfort of routine. Yet no matter how much she tried to push them aside, they continued to grow. The man, on his part, noticed small changes in her behavior. She smiled more often, lingered in the room when she had nothing to do, and sometimes seemed to watch him with curiosity. He felt a warmth in his chest whenever she was near, a strange mixture of happiness and longing that he had not experienced in years. He tried to dismiss it as simple appreciation for her company, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. He found himself thinking about her even when she was not around, wondering if she was safe, if she was happy, if she felt the same connection that he did. One afternoon, a moment arrived that neither of them could ignore. The foxwoman had been helping him repair a small section of the fence in the yard. She had lifted a heavy piece of wood, and he had come to assist her. Their hands touched briefly, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. She felt a jolt of warmth at the contact, and he noticed the subtle way her ears twitched in surprise. Neither of them spoke, but the silence between them was charged with unspoken emotion. That moment, small and seemingly ordinary, revealed the depth of feelings that had been growing quietly over time. After that day, both of them became more aware of each other's presence. She began to linger near him, offering help even when it was not necessary. He found himself looking for excuses to spend time with her. Their conversations became longer and more personal. She shared stories of her childhood, of forests she had known, and nights spent under the stars. He shared his memories, the struggles, and quiet victories of his own life. Through these exchanges, they began to understand each other in a way that went beyond words. They were learning to trust not just the safety of the house, but the hearts of one another, even as their bond grew. Both of them felt the fear of what was happening. The foxwoman was afraid that her feelings would make her vulnerable, that love would bring disappointment or loss. She had never been able to rely on anyone, and the thought of opening her heart completely was terrifying. The man, too, feared that acknowledging his feelings might disrupt the fragile peace they had built. He worried that she might leave if he made his emotions known, that their quiet companionship would be lost. And so, they both continued their silent dance, feeling deeply, yet speaking little, yet the moments of connection kept growing stronger. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, they sat together near the fireplace, sharing a simple meal. The foxwoman had cooked something small, but the care with which she prepared it touched the man more than words could express. He watched her as she moved quietly around the kitchen, her ears twitching at every sound, and felt a deep appreciation for her presence. She, in turn, noticed the way he watched her, the gentle smile on his face, and felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was a moment of unspoken understanding. A moment that made them both realize that what they were feeling was more than friendship. The bond between them grew, not just through shared space, but through shared silence. They learned to read each other's expressions, to understand moods without words, and to anticipate needs without asking. The fox woman would sit quietly while he worked, offering help only when necessary, and he would leave her small gestures of a blanket, a cup of tea, or a kind word. These actions, small and simple, became the language of their growing affection. It was a language that neither of them had expected to speak, yet it was as natural as breathing. As the days passed, the fox woman began to notice the changes in her own heart. She realized that she was no longer just grateful for his shelter. She was attached to him, drawn to his presence in a way that surprised and frightened her. She found herself looking for him, hoping to see him when she woke, and feeling disappointment when he was not around. She felt a deep desire to be near him, to share moments and laughter, to feel his hand in hers. These feelings, once pushed aside as impossible or dangerous, were now undeniable. The man, too, could not ignore his emotions. He found himself caring deeply for her well-being, noticing the small details that made her happy or uncomfortable. He felt joy in her laughter and concern in her silences. He realized that he had come to rely on her presence, that her absence would leave a void he could not bear. Yet, like her, he hesitated to speak. Words had the power to change everything, and he feared that speaking too soon might destroy the delicate balance they had found. So he waited, hoping that time would reveal the right moment. One evening, as rain fell softly against the windows, the foxwoman sat by the fireplace, her tail curled around her, and looked at the man with an intensity that surprised even her. He noticed the gaze and felt a pang in his chest, a mixture of longing and uncertainty. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the warmth of the fire, the quiet rhythm of the room, and the unspoken emotions between them. Both of them realized that they could no longer ignore what was growing in their hearts. Something had shifted from simple companionship to a deeper connection, one that neither could easily define, but both felt profoundly. The days that followed were filled with small, tender moments that deepened their bond. He would leave small notes for her, reminding her to rest or eat, and she would respond with quiet gestures of appreciation. They would share stories by the fireplace, their hands sometimes brushing, causing a flutter of feeling neither could ignore. Every glance, every smile, every shared silence became part of a growing tapestry of emotion, delicate but strong. They were learning that love could begin in the quietest of ways, without grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but through patience, understanding, and kindness. By the end of the third week, it was clear that neither of them could return to the life they had known before. The foxwoman's feelings had grown too strong to ignore, and the man's heart had been touched in a way he had not anticipated. They were bound together, not by words or promises, but by the shared experience of trust, care, and unspoken understanding. And while neither of them had yet admitted their feelings aloud, both sensed that the next step would be the most difficult, an important one of all. The foxwoman realized that she had begun to fall in love with the man who had only given her shelter. She had expected nothing, yet she had found a heart that cared for hers in return. The man, though still hesitant, realized that he, too, felt something more than friendship, something that had quietly grown from the simple act of giving shelter. They were standing at the edge of a new chapter, one filled with both hope and uncertainty. And in that quiet, shared space, they both understood that their lives were no longer separate. They were connected in ways neither could fully explain, yet both could feel deeply and clearly. Life had become a quiet rhythm, comfortable yet full of unspoken tension. The foxwoman had grown used to the safety of the house, to the warmth of the fire, and to the presence of the man who had welcomed her into his life. She had learned to trust him, to feel peace when he was near, and most unexpectedly, to feel something she had never imagined, love. But with love came fear. She had spent her life surviving alone, hiding from the world and trusting no one. Now, even in the safety of the home, a small voice in her heart whispered warnings she could not ignore. She feared the consequences of her feelings. What if her love was not returned? What if the bond they shared was fragile, easily broken by a single word, a single misunderstanding? The foxwoman had lived with rejection and danger for so long that the thought of opening her heart fully was terrifying. Every day, she battled between wanting to stay close to him and wanting to protect herself by keeping her distance. She would sit by the window, watching the world outside, and wonder if it was safer to remain silent, to let the emotions grow quietly in her heart rather than risk revealing them. The man, too, was caught in his own quiet storm. He had begun to feel more than companionship toward her, though he did not yet know how to define it. Her laughter brought warmth to his chest. Her smiles lit up the room. And even the smallest gestures of care, like folding a blanket or leaving a cup of tea, while near him made his heart race in ways he had not felt for years. Yet, he feared expressing these feelings. He worried that speaking too soon would scare her, that she might retreat and undo the trust they had built. He had opened his door to her out of kindness, expecting nothing in return, but now his heart demanded more. And the fear of losing her before anything could begin weighed heavily on him. One afternoon, a small event triggered the tension both had been holding inside. The foxwoman had decided to venture further from the house than she normally did, exploring the edge of the nearby forest. She loved the quiet and the feeling of freedom that came from walking under the tall trees, listening to the birds and feeling the soft moss beneath her feet. But on this day, she stumbled upon signs of danger tracks that belonged to a large predator. Perhaps a wild animal, in the broken branches of trees where something had passed. Fear gripped her heart, and instinctively, she ran back toward the safety of the house. When she arrived, the man noticed immediately that something was wrong. Her ears were pressed back, her tail low, and her breathing was quick. Without hesitation, he approached her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder to steady her. She looked at him, her eyes wide and filled with panic, and for the first time, she could not hide the depth of her fear. She realized in that moment how much she relied on his presence, how much she depended on him for safety. And with that realization came the painful truth. If she could feel this strongly for him, then her feelings for him were real, undeniable, and dangerous to admit. The man understood immediately that she was frightened not only of the forest, but also of her own emotions. He did not press her for words. Instead, he guided her inside, helping her dry off and settle near the fire. He sat quietly, giving her space, but his eyes followed her every movement, silently offering comfort and reassurance. The foxwoman felt an overwhelming mixture of gratitude and longing. She wanted to speak, to tell him everything she felt, but fear held her back. She did not want to risk the fragile trust and safety they had built over the weeks. That evening, storm returned, smaller and less violent than before, but enough to trap them indoors. The foxwoman sat by the window, staring at the falling rain, and the man sat nearby, tending the fire. The room was filled with silence, yet the silence was heavy with emotion. Neither of them spoke, but both could feel the unspoken words lingering in the air. The foxwoman's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and fears. She questioned herself constantly. Was it right to feel this way? Would he ever feel the same? What if her love destroyed everything? The man, sensing her inner turmoil, wanted to speak, to reach out and reassure her that she was safe, that her presence mattered, that she was valued beyond measure. But he also feared that words spoken too soon might push her away. Instead, he focused on small actions, placing a warm blanket over her shoulders, making her favorite tea, and occasionally brushing his fingers lightly across her hand. Each gesture was gentle, deliberate, and full of meaning, though unspoken. These actions communicated what words could not yet convey, that he cared. He noticed that he was there. Over the next few days, the foxwoman's fear of losing control over her feelings grew. She tried to keep a distance, spending more time outside, cleaning and organizing things in the house, hoping that by focusing on tasks, she could quiet the emotions inside her. But every time she looked at him, every time she heard his voice, or noticed the warmth in his gaze, the feelings returned stronger than before. She realized that she could not hide from them, no matter how hard she tried. Her heart had already chosen, even if her mind struggled with the consequences. The man, in turn, began to feel a restless longing. He realized that life without her would leave a void he could not bear. He found himself imagining what it would be like to lose her, and the thought brought a sharp pain. The safety, warmth, and companionship he had grown to depend on were no longer simple comforts. They were lifelines. And in that realization, he knew that he could not ignore his feelings forever. The fear of loss, the fear of a bond broken before it had fully formed, became a driving force within him. One quiet evening, a small accident brought their feelings to the surface. She had been carrying a stack of books to the fireplace when she tripped on a loose rug. The man rushed to catch her, and their bodies collided, hands brushing, faces inches apart. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Their eyes met, and the foxwoman saw the concern, the care, and the unspoken emotions reflected in his gaze. Her heart raced, and she felt a surge of fear and longing all at once. He felt the same, a powerful mix of affection and hesitation. That single moment forced them both to confront the reality they had been avoiding. Their feelings were too strong to ignore any longer. From that day, the tension between them grew, not in anger or conflict, but in anticipation and unspoken questions. They began to notice every small gesture, every glance, every smile, understanding that each action carried meaning. The foxwoman realized that her love was no longer something she could hide. It was an integral part of her being. The man understood that he had reached a point where silence could no longer protect them. Their bond had grown beyond friendship, and companionship had become something deeper, something fragile, yet undeniable. As the fourth week approached, both of them faced a choice. They could continue living in quiet tension, enjoying the comfort of each other's presence without acknowledging the deeper feelings. Or they could take a risk and speak the truth of their hearts. The foxwoman struggled with the fear of rejection, the fear of losing the only person who had ever offered her unconditional safety. The man struggled with the fear of breaking the trust they had built, the fear of damaging the bond that had grown so naturally over the weeks. Yet, despite the fear, both sensed that their hearts were ready for the next step. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, they sat together in quiet contemplation. The foxwoman's tail twitched nervously, and the man's hands were clasped loosely in his lap. Neither spoke at first. The world outside seemed to pause, as if waiting for what would come next, and in that moment, they both understood that fear could no longer hold them back. They had to confront their feelings, or risk losing something precious that had grown from a single act of kindness. That night marked the beginning of a turning point. The foxwoman realized that love could be worth the risk, even if it brought uncertainty and fear. The man understood that protecting her heart included acknowledging his own. Both of them began to see that their connection was no longer just about shelter or survival. It was about trust, understanding, and the courage to face emotions that had long been buried. And in that quiet, shared space, they sensed that the next step would define the future of their lives together. The night was calm, the wind outside soft and gentle, carrying the faint scent of the forest into the small house. The foxwoman sat near the fireplace, her tail wrapped loosely around her legs, her ears twitching at the smallest sound. She had spent the past few days wrestling with her feelings, trying to understand what they meant and what they would demand of her. She realized, with a mixture of excitement and fear, that her heart had already made its choice. She loved the man who had offered her shelter, the man who had never judged her, who had quietly become the center of her world. The man, meanwhile, felt the same unspoken truth. He had spent long nights thinking about what his feelings meant, questioning whether they were right, whether they could survive the differences between them. He had feared that speaking too soon would break the fragile bond they had built. But now, watching her in the soft glow of the firelight, he knew that waiting any longer was impossible. He had to acknowledge the truth that had grown quietly in his heart. He loved her too, for a long while. They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, yet aware of the presence of the other. The foxwoman's heart pounded, and she felt the warmth of anticipation and anxiety in equal measure. She wanted to speak, to confess the feelings she had kept hidden for so long, but fear held her back. What if she was wrong? What if he did not feel the same? And yet, as she glanced at him, she saw the same tension mirrored in his eyes. It was a shared moment of understanding, a silent acknowledgement that something important was happening, something that could no longer be contained. Finally, the man broke the silence, his voice quiet but steady. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the time since you came here, about the days and nights we've spent together. I can't imagine life without you anymore." He paused, searching her face for a reaction. And when he saw the way her ears twitched and her eyes widened slightly, he continued, "I don't know how to explain it all, but I care for you more than I expected, more than I ever thought I could care for anyone." The foxwoman felt a shiver run through her. Relief, joy, and a flutter of fear all mixed together. She had expected rejection, or at least uncertainty, but instead, she found confirmation that the feelings she had tried to hide were shared. Slowly, she stood, stepping closer to him, her heart racing with every movement. I feel the same," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I never thought I could care for someone like this, but I do. I care for you more than I ever imagined." In that moment, the world seemed to pause. The fire crackled softly, casting shadows across the room. But the space between them was filled with a new energy, a bond that was no longer silent or unspoken. They moved closer, cautiously at first, testing the waters of this new connection. Their hands met, fingers intertwining naturally, as if they had always belonged together. Neither spoke for a moment, simply holding the presence of the other, feeling the warmth and comfort that only trust and love could bring. Over the next hours, they shared stories, laughter, and quiet conversation, exploring this new phase of their relationship. The foxwoman told him about her life before the storm, the challenges she had faced, and the moments of loneliness she had endured. The man shared his own past, the quiet struggles, and the small victories that had defined his solitary life. In doing so, they discovered not only their feelings for each other, but also the depth of understanding and empathy that had grown between them. They realized that love was not only about attraction, but about respect, care, and shared experiences. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. The foxwoman became more comfortable expressing her emotions openly, and the man learned to reciprocate with gestures of affection and reassurance. They laughed together, cooked meals together, and shared quiet evenings by the fire. Every small act, every shared glance, every smile deepened the connection that had begun with a simple act of shelter. They understood that love was not a sudden spark but a steady flame, built over time through trust, patience, and kindness. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows and illuminated the room, the foxwoman decided to do something she had never done before. She approached him quietly, carrying a small gift, a simple bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from the forest near their home. She handed it to him with a shy smile, her ears twitching nervously. "These are for you," she said softly, "for everything you've done for me and for the kindness you've shown." The man accepted the flowers with a gentle smile, touched by the thoughtfulness behind the gesture. "Thank you," he said, placing them in a small vase on the table. I don't think you realize how much you mean to me. Not just now, but from the moment you came here." He paused, taking her hands in his, and looked into her eyes. "You've changed my life. You've given me something I didn't know I was missing. Hope, joy, and love." Tears filled the foxwoman's eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of belonging and happiness she felt. She realized that she had finally found a place where she was accepted, where she was valued, and where her heart could be safe. And the man, seeing her expression, understood that they had both found something rare and precious, a love that had grown quietly, patiently, and surely, nurtured by kindness and trust. As the days turned into weeks, they continued to build their life together. The foxwoman no longer worried about being alone or misunderstood. She knew that she had a partner who would care for her, respect her, and stand by her no matter what. The man, in turn, embraced the joy and warmth she brought into his life. realizing that giving shelter had led to something far greater than he could have imagined. Together, they created a home filled with laughter, comfort, and understanding, a home where both felt safe and loved. Their story became a quiet legend of its own. Neighbors occasionally noticed the foxwoman moving gracefully around the property, helping in small ways, and the man tending the house with a contented expression. Yet very few knew the depth of the bond between them, the journey they had traveled from fear and caution to love and trust. They did not need the approval of the outside world. What mattered was the connection they had nurtured in the quiet moments of shared life. One evening, as they sat together watching the stars, the foxwoman rested her head on his shoulder. "I never imagined I could feel this way," she said softly. "I thought life would always be lonely, that I would always have to protect myself. But you showed me something different. You showed me love and safety and hope." He kissed her forehead gently, holding her close. "And you've shown me how to feel again. I never knew how empty my life was before you came. You've brought light into my world, and I'll always be grateful for that." They sat in silence for a long time, simply enjoying the comfort of each other's presence. The past, the storms, the fears, they all seemed far away, placed by a future filled with promise. The foxwoman and the man had begun with a single act of kindness, giving and accepting shelter. But that act had grown into something much greater than either of them could have imagined. It had grown into love, trust, and a partnership built on understanding and respect. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and hesitation. But they had chosen to embrace their feelings, to take the risk, and to build a life together. In doing so, they discovered a truth that is often overlooked. Love is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it begins quietly, grows steadily, and changes everything in ways that words alone cannot capture. As night deepened and the stars shone brightly in the sky, they sat together, hands entwined, hearts full, and minds at peace. The foxwoman felt a profound sense of belonging, and the man felt a quiet joy he had never known before. They had found each other in a world that often felt cold and uncertain, and through patience, care, and courage, they had built a love that was strong, gentle, and enduring. And in that small house at the edge of the town, they both knew that they were home not just in the physical sense, but in the truest sense of the word. The story of the man and the foxwoman was no longer just about shelter. It was about trust, love, and the courage to open one's heart. It was about two beings from different worlds finding harmony in their differences, and discovering that even the smallest acts of kindness can create a lifetime of happiness. And as they looked at each other, smiling quietly in the warm glow of the fire, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. Bound by the love that had grown from a simple gesture of compassion,